Okay, so let's begin this practice this morning. So you'll have your bolster, so it's across your mat behind you, and your blankets are pretty finely stacked so that you have this layer of height, but you're able to press it down. That's one idea that we work with, the differences of bolsters and blankets. And today, when we work with our hips and the layers of the props, I want you to notice when you lie back into your bolster, how the range of motion of your basically your hips can kind of move around, right? Even though round isn't really what you're thinking of the hips right now. But when we elevate the hips on a block, you're going to tuck a block under the back of your pelvis. You want to have your sandbag nearby, a belt nearby, and I would be slightly cautious about getting your brain back on that blanket sooner than later versus kind of cranking your head up and down, because you can adjust your block and adjust your situation with your rib cage after your brain is back. Okay, so let the ribs have their motion, their range of motion, which is kind of like it's like a brick. The body pieces feel sometimes like these heavy positions on your props. But when we start to move our feet closer to our block or our core, I want you to take a belt that's overhead, I think. And before we add any sand, we're going to keep it simple with the alignment assignment, but let your feet position to the soles together, the knees apart. So it's a bound angle or cobbler's pose. And then your arms have this opportunity to grasp onto the belt. And when you hold that belt, your block is at the lower than medium height. You get to choose, okay? When you hold your belt and you take that direction of the arms overhead, take the hands out as wide as they can comfortably correspond with the muscles. So I want the hands so that they're in a space where they really do feel as if the muscles are responding, right? So it's not just kind of slumped back. It's got some responsibility to it. And then as your arms take the hands out a little farther on the belt, you might get lucky and have the blanket sort of supporting you a little bit. So when the blanket, depending on the arm's length, is touching underneath, feel that connectivity of your feet, that motion of the knees separating. Of course, you can adjust these positions to what works for you, which might mean your feet are farther down, or your feet are closer in, or your knees are a little bit higher. So finding these connectors, these circulation shifts in the ribs to start, and if the eyes can center back, each of these shapes gives us an opportunity to experiment with the movement of the breath in the lungs and how that movement transfers out into the circulation of the muscles, the skin, the organs, the bones, and all those good things that make you, right? What's underneath your mind coming to the class is to take care of those spaces. So let's join in a few moments here of connecting to our breath, simply awareness, feeling the arms. Now, simple moving your knees to point up. I want you to let go of the grip of the belt, but keep it so it's kind of like maybe you can feel it at the top of your head. You don't have to put it over your forehead, but have it so you could easily get a hold of it again. And then when you bring your arms so they just simply position open, I want you to let the right leg actually lift up the right foot and feel that right thigh crease the knee in towards your midsection. So it's a knee towards chest. And then relax your right foot and lower it back down and change sides and continue this pattern of kind of exploration of your movement, of your posterior core, but also the connectivity in your hips, your hip flexors, and creating circulation in the core muscles. So take a few more of these each side. You can speed it up, you can slow it down. And as you move the legs into this pattern of motion, you're going to slide both feet straight down and then find that sand and place it across the thigh lids. If you have multiple sandbags, right, you could put one here, you could put one at your ribs. If you do not like this leg sand piece, you can have one across the ribs. So when you motion your heels down, you might step the feet apart so that the connectivity through the lines of energy in your frontal hips helps move the frontal spine. And let the core soften with the breath. Feel the reach back to that belt again. And as you hold on to the belt, now I'd like you to try to bring your hands so that they are truly wider than shoulder distance, but not too extreme. So they're not flopping out. They still have some articulation of the shoulder joint. And when you're there, can you let your arms actually rest into the blankets? And then feel, as your eyes may be centering and closing, the reach down to your heels, the length in through the back muscles, and the connectivity of the inhale, filling the lungs completely, and emptying the lungs, centering the core of the body. Feel yourself arriving in these first 10 minutes of practice, noticing some of the specifics of the muscles that we're kind of attempting to design. Most of this beginning is the frontal spaces, but taking them into an experience that's not dropping forward and down, that's stretching them up and back. Good. So feeling the legs relax. Can you let the sand support and ground you? And gently remove the grip of your hands onto the belt. And then as you stretch your arms open, stretch is kind of a funny word for defining things here. Because we're working on boosting and optimizing the flow and circulation in the upper respiratory tree. So trying to let the arms, move open, stretch, spread out the chest walls is helpful for our shoulders, right? It's helpful for our core. So let yourself even kind of enjoy it. If you get a little sleepy in the shape too, that's okay. You'll stir out of it at some point. And feeling where you can be content with a shape. It's not stressful. It's kind of restful in some ways. It's allowing the muscles that rotate the other direction to feel their fullness and their full expression. So as we let the legs relax, the hips center, and the core fluctuate with the breath, let's take one full 4 to 5 count in breath through the nose. And exhaling out through the mouth. Now, as we start to slide the hands down to the bolster, okay, so you might feel your arms on the bolster. Your hands are going to reach to the sand, wherever it might be lying. And move your sandbag. If you've got 2, you'll remove one and keep just one across the rib intersection. And then kind of notice the leg tendencies, right? They probably have some rotation. And so I'm going to use that rotation to the benefit of my hip. So give a few moments of sliding your feet together one more time, knees out, feet together, and feel the connectivity of the thigh band, right? Especially the upper weave from the pelvis, the pelvic rim, out into the thigh, the adductor. You might notice that it's kind of stretching. It's not like it would be if you're sitting up and pushing down to your feet together, knees apart. So kind of observe these interesting patterns where we can lie and let the whole body be part of the pose, but it is isolated, right, where the focus right now is working. So we're going to move the knees so as they position back up through center. I want you to walk your feet in closer towards your seat. Be a little cautious of the knees. Separate the feet a little wider and let the knees rest together so the knees tap into rest inwards, touching. Okay, feel how the back of the pelvis might neutralize. And then with the knees drawing in together, interlace your fingers, push the hands towards the ceiling. And then as the arms elongate, well, mostly the center of your body elongates. The arms are just the arms, right? They don't necessarily push farther yet. But when we're in these poses, just kind of notice your muscle balance. I'm starting to notice good arm elongation skills are from things like dog pose or reaching back towards child's pose. So kind of study that today. We'll do all of them. Okay, now as I remove the block, we're going to separate the hands. Usually a hand helps do that. I don't know if you have other abilities besides that, but slide the sand off. And then as you lift up your tush, or you might be able to roll to your left and then use the rib cage separation that you just worked with in the front. You're going to kind of feel how you can push your elbow onto that bolster and move your knees maybe where they're comfortable. They're not really in a stressed out position right now. So feel how your this whole rib cage is layered on its side. And now when you put your elbow down between the props, you might use a ball or a block inside the right leg and see if you can make this leg pattern so it's either expressive, meaning this leg sweeps back, or maybe it's impressive and it's a little closer to the other leg. But when I'm here, I'm actually trying to get my ribs to rotate back, right? So it's a spiraling, it's a counter kind of spiraling position for the rib cage. So place your blankets close enough. If this is too low, you can tuck one of the blankets up higher. And then you'll add the sand to the side or the hip. And when you come back into your bolster setting, you might notice the sand differences. The placement of it does affect your kind of, you want to use the sand to be like wisely placed so that you can center and release. So this is a little bit of a concerning space for me right in the center. So you might find the hip works good for you because it's thick, right? The bone it has a different density. The waist is a little more vulnerable, and the ribs, you could go higher. But as the right arm goes overhead, it either lands on a block or some stool that you have around. And when you center your arm over, feel that continuation of the ribs opening. Maybe that counter spin is part of your practice where you rotate the chest towards the ceiling. As that arm is lengthening, you let your head find a place to rest. And then as we're in this kind of sliver of practice, this little portion for the side work, feel if you can let your body surrender into the props. Okay, so the weight difference here is some of it's in my side, my back, shoulder, my low back for me right now, but some of you might be really completely on your side, right? So you're pivoting, you're more into the rib head, and some of us are more into the back. rotating. So sample that, kind of rock a little bit side to side on your ribs and emphasize that sensation of the costal breathing. So the intercostals, the muscles between the ribs, expand and contract. Now, when you're adjusting your structure to get like a little bit more centered, when you do those things that you know, kind of you fidget usually in a pose. So take a few more moments if you're going to fidget or center. There you go. Before we come out. I know, are we staying in, Nicole? Are we going out? What are we doing? You know, and if you're using the sand, it does help you center and ground. If you're not, that's okay. And then you have a different dependency on the breath to get you kind of heavily into the shape and supported. So feel that opportunity through the waistband. Okay, now, if you notice what leg is emphasized at the base, what we're going to do is let that left hip be a focal point for a little bit. And then this upper hip will be coming into a pigeon pose pretty soon. So let me kind of show you how we'll layer into this unique kind of texturing of the bones. So start to separate from this reality of side sage. You're going to shift your right arm down towards your left arm. And then when you rotate to that left rib spatially, you're going to slide your hands in under. And then you might get your stand up before then, or your ball rolls away. When you come up, what we're going to take is our bones to sit our pelvis onto this bolster and kind of notice how your bones center down, how the back ribs, the thick back ribs are, they're going to try to stay upright because you're doing a practice, but they don't always try to stay upright in daily sitting. But you don't have anything behind you to help yourself sit up, right? So let's try this. Let's take a block. You've got probably a couple of them around. So place your block under your left foot, and your sandbag is on the left thigh, if you've got sand, okay? The blankets behind you, you're gonna kind of tuck those in so you have them close. I know we're all different with our arm range of motion, but I wanna get some kind of movement with the arms. So take a belt with your right hand and reach the arm that's holding that belt, the right hand behind you. So what you have is that arm position, it reaches back, the elbow is up, you're holding onto the belt, and the left arm, okay, you're trying to push it open out to the left side, and then bend your elbow to hold onto the belt and make sure that the right hand is holding and you're trying to move that elbow up, the right elbow up. Okay, lean forwards. Okay, and connect to the thigh pattern here. Feel where the back starts to almost go into an extension, right? Spine is an extension. More extension and flexion. So see if you can work with lifting up out of that low back versus rounding and flexing the back. Okay. Now the right elbow naturally sinks, right? It doesn't want to stay, prim and proper. Like its ear doesn't want to point up. The idea is this is resembling that. So when you come up, you're going to point the right elbow to the ceiling and then let go of the belt with your left hand. Actually, you can let go of the belt entirely and bring your left hand up to the right elbow and press that elbow towards the back of your space. So now if you're pushing the elbow into your brain, right, I want you to try to encourage that elbow to go back. The back starts to go into an arch. It's a little challenging. Now, both arms can stretch open, release, roll your shoulders several times, And then get that feel of this elevation for the moment with your left foot. And then lower the left foot to the floor and take a couple blocks and start to shift your blocks to the top right corner of your space. So you're going to about kind of like 1 o'clock with the blocks. So they start to support that angle of your waist, your hip, and you personalize this position. If it doesn't feel supportive, right, you could have your blocks in front. This feels good. So those two options, find what's the most centering, not necessarily the most advanced you can do, but where you could spend a few moments. And if your knee is bothering you, you could use the ball, or you could find something else, a blanket to stuff under the legs. So we don't want them to hurt, right? If it hurts around the knee, then use some props. But feel that connectivity of the mid back now. And then round your back into a cat shape, chin to chest. Inhale, gently arch the spine. Chest slides a little bit forward. Exhale, round through the back. Chin towards the chest. Now centering the chest forwards, so a little bit of arching, and slide the blocks besides your knees. And then as you come up, spine up, you're going to take that sand to the right thigh. With or without sand, we just shift our leg position. And then I lower down the right knee, so I pull the right foot with my leg muscles to move it closer to the bolster, and then cross the left leg over the right. And then we take that twist, so we turn a block. The block might be helpful behind you if you're pretty lengthy. Sometimes the blanket's plenty, but we'll reach our right elbow to that left leg. And I want you to get a feel for, I'm kind of sampling ways that you might go. But when you feel that left leg crossed over, this is an opportunity for the circulation in the ankles and all those bones in the legs that we're going to be giving a deep stretch to at some point. Right now, we're kind of anchoring them into place. So feel when that right arm either holds the left leg like this, like with a hand cupping the knee, or put the elbow just to the outer side of that left leg, a little more challenging. And when you turn, the left hand comes back to the blanket or the block, and the waist rotates. Well, it has to go somewhere, and it has to twist. So appreciate what it can do, right? It might not be sweeping you all the way around like an owl here with your trunk, but the coordination of that strength, of that intra-abdominal pressure, right? That toning here for the core and the massage for the organs is really critical. So connect to that breath pace. Try to regulate an inhale for 4 counts. And let the exhalation sweep the lungs. Try to lengthen your exhale. Maybe letting go of the numbers for that one. Just feel how you create range of motion for your lungs with your breath. And then we unwind, we come forward. We keep it simple. We move the block away from behind us. I want you to take a counter twist for a few moments. Bring the left arm on the inside of the left knee, and then turn. So your left hand might actually hold the left shin. And when you turn right, your right hand might touch down to the blanket, and then give yourself just this little bit of lift. The hip flexor on the left thigh might kind of perk up and may be questionable for you right now. Like, is that what I want with my hip? So what we're doing at this point is coming out of this very short time, take any sand off, and then stretch this left hip flexor back on blankets. So you want your blankets high. If you've got a belt back there, kind of shift it away. And then turn so this left hip flexor is lengthening down into the prop. It's pretty large layer of props behind you. So, or from your behind and beyond. So the hands can open out onto the mat. You can let your toes hook under or let the toes relax, feels good. And then as you start to pursue lower and down, feel when the elbows are touching down. If this is a little bit concerning for your knee, remember the more height under your right sitting bone, the more comfortable it will be around your right knee. Right? It's not going to have as much compression in the joint. And for many of us, having the bolster is good enough for that idea, but sometimes you need a little bit more. Okay, so you can also opt out of the pose too. No requirement in the sequence to follow everything. And as we continue, what pose we've decided on here, I want you to pursue that feeling of the Sphinx pose. So the elbows are down. There's nothing really under your core, you know, your heart core. So feel where the hands open, feel where the chest tries to move forward, but the back is doing a lot of the work here, the lower back. You kind of enjoy that lower back support. Breathing. Now, as the weight centers back into your sitting space, I'm going to give everybody this option when they shift the sides. So some of you might stay here a little longer, understood. And if you are staying longer, you might walk the hands to the left side, which is that other opportunity that we did a few moments ago with our hip stretch. Some of us are ready to come out. So those of us that are going to come out soon, the rest of you could stay in it a little longer if you like, steeping in your pose. But when you swing the left leg forward, we're going to come down off of the bolster, actually. Elbows on the bolster and windshield wiper the knees side to side. Try to get your feet as wide as the mat, if not a little wider. You don't want to take it too far out so you still have a little traction for your feet. But get that feel of the leg sighting. And, well, there's leg sighting when you look downwards. And at some point, you might close your eyes and just encourage that awareness of feeling the bones touch down. Right when you look, sometimes your sensation, recollection is different because your eyes are going to see something. Could be something in your room. At home, it could be just about anything. So when you go side to side with your hips, you're going to lean out to your right hip. They turn away for a moment. You're going to your right hip. You're going to actually shift your weight over and then scoot up to your bolster. Now the blankets are probably a little close for comfort, right? So you have to push them back. And then when you start to blend your left thigh back, you've got maybe a block on the inside or a ball. And go right into this side. The block overhead was helpful for quite a few. So that is something to kind of remember to put back. But be mindful because just one move of your arm in a challenging way for you could do something. So you want to go slow and mindful when you reach with that left limb overhead. And then spatially, you know, have a little bit of muscle memory of what you worked with the last side. If you were a counter spinner, if you did a lot of this kind of oscillating motion with the ribs, the armpit, chest, you know, these are good patterns to play with. If I could work with counter spinning and then have my left palm down on the block, turning down, would be nice for my wrist, right, to have some different directions in its lifetime versus what it normally gets 95% of its time. And if this doesn't hurt, right, you might try something different with your hand. And I know this is a little more advanced, right? When you counter spin, it's a lot of connectivity in your rib cage breathing. But I think in time, it's a good practice. Pull the knee up towards your bolster, the right knee, and then feel that connection of arching the spine, back bending, rib expansion, lung intensity. And then when your right arm is between the two, you can let the body weight center. This pose started for most of us when we felt most of our body weight, like when you first did this, maybe on your lower hip. And all these other places were not accessible. So, you know, some of us have really come some distance with getting the spatial kind of separation when we're in practice, kind of opening up, loosening of the tension or the holding patterns. Maybe holding patterns is a kinder way to say it versus tension, huh? So eyes closing, centering in. Any change you need to make with your body is okay. If it doesn't feel supportive, then shift it and see if you can find a supportive wave of movement, breathing. I'm going to take a few more moments here. That left shoulder gets a little bit stuffy and doesn't want to stay. You can always move it down on the side of your body or down next to your right arm. Okay. So it's that base hip that we're going to influence to start. This is the hip right now that's getting the weight bearing, that right hip. So it might not feel like it's getting a lot of stretch in this second, right? Maybe it's your left hip that gets a little bit. So when we work the reach of the arm, the reach of the torso, yeah, it's funny because that torso depends on your leg, your extremities on both sides of it to help support that circulation in the organs and the back muscles, the spine, the paraspinals. Okay, so as you start to shift out, let's see how we went. If you have a block overhead, this might be an intelligent time to do both things. Your left knee draws towards your right leg. Your block is moved over to the side, and then your sand is taken off. Maybe this side will get up with a little more responsibility and care. Okay, so when you roll to your right rib cage, like that means the whole rib cage downwards. Use your hand to help push you up, and then come up so that your seat is supported. And this time, the right foot is on a block, okay? So find a block to put under that right foot and have the kind of look down towards your seat pattern, right? And maybe move out the flesh at the buttock space so that you feel like you have a wide stance, like when you stand for poses, wide stance. It's the same thing with seated stance. And so we have sand options. Some of us sand onto that right leg. Yeah, we kind of get this feel so that when we take the belt, now let's say you find you can go here and hold on to your belt, but maybe some find they can hold their hands, like barely get the fingertips. So I would encourage you to use the belt if you're close, or you can do it, but you struggle and you kind of cringe a little in your arm to get there. So it seems like the belt is just a good all around, maybe for good. Maybe this is going to be where it's at, is to use something between the hands. But when you move your elbow up, I want you to also get a feel of trying to move that right hand closer to the left hand. So, but that's going to feel interesting in your right shoulder right away. It's going to creep around the inner lining of that right arm up into the rotator cuff and feel a little bit strange, right? So it's okay to keep that pattern of trying it. If anything gets numb, right, that's not therapeutic, then you have to move out. So you could start feeling some real wrap around the arms, kind of like it's a cellophane wrap. It's getting tighter and tighter. So we let go of the belt, and then we bring the right hand around and up to that left elbow. And I'm going to encourage you to let your hand on the left arm, get sloppy, right? So it just kind of hangs. It doesn't have any real destination right now. You just let it be. And then get a hold of that left elbow like you're picking the elbow up off of the bone, right? And you're trying to get that connective tissue. And this is for our twist coming up, is why I want you to have this skin to stretch over the bone. Okay. Now as you take out the arms into the hands, rotate, or you can hold your shoulders and rotate the elbows out, back, and down. And feel that motion of the elbows or the shoulders. Okay, now put the foot on the floor. Feel if there's a difference in your back condition when you do that. If you feel, I think as you mature in the practice, you're going to feel more subtleties as time goes on, like a little piece of this part of your back and part of your knee, for better or worse, right? So I've got my body leaning forward. I'm going to take my blocks, both of them, to the left side. So I want you to reach to your rotating ability in your waist. So it's like keep in the pose, but your body is turning to the left, and it's like you're kind of dissecting. So it's like you've got that lower trunk centered, and then you're trying to move your thoracic to that left side. And as we stretch our hands to the blocks, you could be to the left and you could be to the front with your blocks. You can personalize that completely. You're not really vulnerable to the situation that can happen in a classroom, right? You have a little bit more, privacy, and you have certainly that ability to wander in poses or wander off the mat. That's part of it. So your commitment, your discipline is definitely challenged in the home practice on a whole different level, isn't it? So wherever you go with the arms is okay. You do not have to go to the left. If that feels like difficult, you might stay with it and see what you can loosen in the waistband. Because all those things affect the hip, right? The waistband connects into the hip. So go ahead and come back with those blocks, or sort of like bring them out to the side. Move your sand to your left upper inner thigh, and then cross that right foot to the other side of the left leg, so the thigh. Okay. Now, when you turn to the right, you're going to be moving your left arm. Now, this arm we were stretching like so. There was some reason behind this. It wasn't just because it's something you could do with your elbow and call it a pose. But when you turn to the right, you can use a block behind you. You can use a blanket behind you. You might kind of stuff your blankets in a little bit. It's probably nice to do. But you choose. But when you turn, you want to have this kind of wide stance version of the pose. So it's like, how wide can you make the experience from your left arm, through your right shoulder, through your rib cage, and beyond. So you're turning. And the head, if it turns with your pose, you might find a way to turn your head and center the brain, closing your eyes, and concentrate on the left arm, bending a little bit. So you're trying to bring your right leg close and across the midline. Always a pose you can advance on. And this one just goes on and on, the different levels and layers of the abdominal massage. So it's so intricate viscerally, the visceral manipulation in the organs. The challenge I find is that you can get a little carried away at kind of digging into the rotation. So when you come out, I want you to just simply turn to your other side. So the right arm touches the inside. And as you rotate the other direction, if you have a hip flexor, like the top of the thigh kind of all instantly is feeling that. I want you to try to let that knee, that right leg actually push into your right arm a little bit. So push into the arm. So you have some counterbalance in the muscles. So kind of play with that, pushing back into the arm. It doesn't make it like it's an easy pose. That requires a lot of discipline. Okay, now come back forward and move that hip flexor into a little bit of bliss. So you've got the bolster right next to the blanket. Not sure how this belt is stuck there between the two worlds. Okay, now have your right leg go back if you haven't already, and kind of feel how you twist to get here. You better kind of turn your hips and then center your pelvis. And so this blanket, actually the bolster is really the helper, really can hold your balance in your pelvis nicely. Okay, maybe as the arms go downwards, you start to make some decisions with the arm connection. So it might be hands holding a block wide. This is one version. It could be palms on the ground, or your hands could kind of frame the block. Kind of play with it. But feel the sensation through that left hip, and then do you have any capacity to feel it into the connection from the hip to the knee, or is that place sort of kind of mystery territory right now? Until we get onto the next little phase, you will probably find this is site specific for a little bit longer. So with that hip connection, hands are either centered in Sphinx, or you can move them over to the right side. You could keep it kind of contrite, like kind of keep the arms a little bit close, not too splayed out. And the back leg is resting. How quickly the hip flexor can calm down. It has kind of a short fuse, I think, that area. When it's irritated, it gets very kind of fights. Must be a fight or flight spot. Now with that relationship of your breath into your back space or your hip space, you're going to start to move back into center, okay? So walk your hands in, and we're going to actually, I want us to push back into a little bit of hands and whole body integration. So when you hook your toes under on your right foot, and you come back, you have your mat clear in front of your leg. And as you step back, you're gonna have to scoot your right foot in a little bit, and then feel where the weight references in your arms. If it's too much on your wrists, bring your hands apart, farther out to the edge of your mat. And then as you unload and bring your knees back to the blanket, your hands are pretty splayed out. You're gonna round your back into this kind of unique cat pose, and then reach your hips down evenly to the bolster or your thighs and lift up the chest. Breathe to the front spine. And then as you come back, you're going to let your toes hook under and reach the hips back. You might like to push your bolster in front of you and let your hands be on top of that and kind of rock a little back and forth, and let your head lower towards the floor, or it touches down. Now, if my head touches down and it doesn't feel comfortable in my shoulders, it's too much stretch in my armpits, then I have something under my head. But give it a few seconds here. Add props if you need to. Okay, breathe so that the spine comes back up to centering. And then lower down your hands, and I want you to bring your body weight. Let's use our bolster for this under our head in case we want that support. Some of you might find your head touches down to it in our next pose. Some of you might find that you have to lift it up to touch to it. So when you lift up your knees into a stretching back of the legs, the feet step out almost as wide as your mat. You're going to let your hips lead back and your head lower towards your bolster and really try to stretch your heels to the floor. If they're a far cry from the floor, don't cry about it, okay? Let your knees bend, let your heels lift a little bit, and then let's play a little bit with getting those calves so that they are stretchable into these shapes, okay? So we're gonna stretch our hips back and up, or back up the body, and walk our hands back towards the blankets and toss off a blanket. Keep one and step your toes up on top of it so the heels are down off the back of the blanket to stretch your calves. I suppose you could do this with 2 blankets, actually. I think that'd be a little intense, but you could try it. I mean, your toes would be quite high up. You know, that's a little bit menacing for some calves. Now, when you're leaning down, you might find the bolster is a huge support here. So my legs have a bending pattern because that's what legs do best. And then as your hips move back, feel if you can actually angle them straight back versus just to the ceiling, right? And then the load on your heels is rather intense. So feel the bottoms of the feet working. And then maybe you start to straighten your legs. Oh, that's a pretty selective experience in both of your legs, maybe pretty even. Breathe. Try to let the breath be even in its distribution in the lungs. If your wrists get a little bit tired from this, it happens. You could put your bolster down, let your hands shift on top of the bolster. Perfect. And then let the spine really get that stretch. Now, if you've got some issues with spine, you know, you've been told a little bit of issues here and there. You want to be a little careful how you kind of flop into some of these. You want to have some structural support. So that's going to come from the root of your body to keep your spine integrated. So in this next phase, we're going to scoot our feet off or push carefully the blanket forwards. So your bottoms of your feet are on the floor and you're going to scoot your feet out to the edge of your mat. The feet are parallel as they could be. They don't have to be perfect, but they're parallel, toes are forward. And then let your hands hold the legs and let the head lower down so you're in an inverted position. And let the seat stretch up out of the back of the legs through the sitting bones, head lowers down. It's not like it's on a pulley system and you can suddenly get it to lower, crank it down, right? It's about letting gravity have you. So it's all a gravitational thing, right? How you let go is such a huge part of the practice in life, huh? So if my neck is kind of holding and gripping, you could massage, you know, at the very upper spine into the brainstem. I would avoid cradling your neck and kind of cranking on it. See if you can let gravity do the work. So it feels like your face is getting pretty full, right? It's a bit of a circulational shift, in the skin cells of the face. So I guess that's why this class was named that, huh? Okay, so before we come out, give yourself some opportunity to lightly explore. Bend the knees, feel the knees maybe shift a little side to side so you kind of feel the rumbling in your back releasing. And then when you bring your hands on forward on the ground as the feet walk in, you're going to have more grounding. And then lower down the knees. And let's take this, so I think the one blanket idea will be just fine. But I have a little space between my blanket and my bolster. It's not much, right? But it's so I have a little bit more reach. But it's up to you. You might be comfy with your blanket really close. Now let's take it so that as we're here, we have the right leg reaching back and the left arm reaching forward. Have some discipline for the core work here. Feel that alternating. And as you alternate to the other side, right knee down, left leg back, and feel if you can push it straight back. And then reach straight forward with your arm. Go as far with that reach as you can, both sides, both arm and leg. I know you can't do both sides at once, but maybe in another incarnation, but not right now. Okay, so get a feel as your arm reaches, your back leg is an extending position. Your spine is an extension. And as you lower that right hand down, let's take it so the left foot steps up to the top left corner of your mat. And as you sink your right thigh down, the top thigh, you might decide you want some blocks under your elbows or your hands, or maybe you're fine with this quite expressive stretch for the thighs. And if you do find that you can keep the arms in a straight position and it's not hurting anything, you don't feel ache in your wrists, then stay with it. But if it is concerning you, you might bring your blocks under your elbows and see if that works still, right? So that might be just as well for some of us. And the left knee is in a lot of bend, right? There's a lot of angle here. So you might put your left foot a little farther forwards. That's funny, I was taking a session, somebody on the East Coast, and they were asking where I was from, and I told them, they said, that's a good place to live if you do yoga, Bend, Oregon. It's kind of funny. So when you have that hip reaching down, I don't really feel like my hip is reaching on my right side. It's sort of doing what I'm telling it to do because I know it's a good circulation shift in the hip. So try to reach your left arm up. This is a challenging position here. My right elbow is on my block. That's a big help. But I am committed to the balance here. Okay, now lower the left hand down, so that was momentary. Shift the leg direction. So you're gonna come back with your hip loads, left knee back, right foot forward and out, right? So feel that top thigh. I'll give you a little bit of a hint where we are moving. We are gonna come into legs up rather soon. So I want you to get as much circulation, intensity in the legs one at a time. So they have different awareness patterns in the right leg right now and the left leg. Right, so when I lower the elbows down, they might go to the block. Some of you might be on your bolster with your elbows. And no one is required to use a bolster under their leg. It is restorative using the bolster, but you could do this without any props, I suppose. Okay, now the upper back, I'm trying to let that release a little bit down. Feel the top of the back thigh. Let it just center. Yeah, noticing if you tend to push, or you can just let gravity have you. And be sure you're stable on your block on the left arm. Before you turn to the right and stretch your arm up, you can opt out of this one too. We won't make you sign anything. You can opt out and stay down. Okay, there's no force here. You find what works. What's kind of interesting is the circulation dynamic in the arms. Sometimes you think they're left out a lot in these practices, but we try to sweep through the arms into the support of the circulation of the heart and lungs. But with that heart and lung focus, when you bring your right arm down, what we're going to do for the heart and lungs, right, is to invert. So when you walk your hands back onto the floor of the blocks, I want you to slide the body weight. So you're going to lean your hips back center, like you kind of are in all fours usually. And then turn that bolster carefully, you get all these props to maneuver, and walk your right foot in center and walk it over all the way so that you're on the bolster. And then swing the left leg forward, and we're gonna lower on our backs. Okay, so take the blanket behind you, toss it back. And then when you come onto your back space, I want you to get a feel here where your back muscles are balanced. So when I lower back, I have my blanket. Now, the blanket is an option. It's not like a requirement for legs up under your head. It's a comfort, I think, more than anything. But you can try both. It depends on your flooring, I think. But as you bring your legs up, try to go one at a time and really be thoughtful of the approach with the back of your pelvis on the bolster. So when you lift up that second leg, you might wag your tail a little bit side to side and get your seat so it's really at that edge of the bolster. You really do have the rule of the rib occurring, and you might feel your heart rate change. You might feel a little bit of long labor just to get here, but it usually pans out. So we got a sandbag, maybe. If you have one, grab it. And then as you bring your knees in, you got to somehow get your sand to your feet, right? And some people find that they can toss the sand up carefully when their knees hug in towards their armpits, and some will go other directions. I've kind of seen all the different ways of getting sand on, but usually you have to apply it from having your back really stretched out. So just to get there is quite a bit of flexibility. So if it's just a bit much, then you don't have to use the sand. It's not required. Okay, so come into the Deepavita Karani pose, reverse angle. Okay, so we have the legs as they are elevated. And maybe even notice when your arms open out to cactus, as you let your eyes relax, if your consciousness feels the legs upside down and what that is experiencing right into your heart rate, it should be slowing down a little bit. Your breath pace, exhalation naturally lengthens. And the resting of the organs from gravity's downward pull. So initially it might be challenging, but as time goes on, that difference in the organs centered, the hips a little bit lifted, it's simply the opposite of prolapse. So it's a positive for your structure, your pelvic floor. And rather than relying on a conversation that kind of carries on sometimes, I know in the class I can carry on more than you want to hear about the science of this, but kind of go with the feeling here. Focus on where you can feel your legs with the flexing of the feet and the distance of them from you. So that could mean you move your feet a little forwards, strengthen your stomach muscles, only go as far forward as you really feel your hip flexors are, of course, attached, but they're not in that short fuse of tightening up. So feel where you flex your feet so your calves stretch. Yeah, let's rely on this one for the calves right now instead of doing too many poses today. Let's just keep it simple. This is a time of class when I start adding on a lot, and then it's a little much, I think. So feel the feet flexing. And then when that direction of the legs, maybe for some of you went a little forward, it's interesting if you were to look at yourself in your screen or mirror, most of the time you think you're going forward, but you're really vertical. So it's pretty unlikely that you are going too far out of your actual structural hope for this one. So if I start to move my feet towards my head, right, it's still okay. It's a nice stretch. So you might take some of that positionally. But what I want us to do is start to move into an upward facing forward bend. So we bend the knees. That means the legs have to go towards your ribs. They're not going to do much the other way. But as I hold on to the sand, I'm going to put it on the back of my legs. So cross the back of the legs, and your heels might kind of lift up, and that might feel interesting. Let the interesting be part of it, not like, this is awkward, you know, whatever it could be. Use the bolster to get your back to stretch, and feel if the feet just come together because it seems appropriate, or if the feet were a little bit apart, like almost like if you had a block between them, that's probably not fundamentally going to be reasonable to do, but I'm going to try it anyway. Yeah, that's the distancing when you look at the textbooks, right? It's not let's cross our ankles and cuddle our feet together, but it sort of doesn't feel appropriate, right? I know that's part of this too. So work with what you can. You don't have to put a block between your feet, but just notice you want some space. And your arms are going to flow more out, straight out to the side, straight open versus cactus. Okay. Now I've got my heels, they drop back towards my seat. That was what they naturally did. What I want you to try to do is keep the legs there, a little bit of drift. Get the drift. Take a few more seconds here. We can do a few more. The whole back has been elongated. Okay. So when you slide your sand off, okay, you're going to bring your feet. Actually, you're going to let the knees stay in that bending pattern, and then hold on to, in a block, place the block or a ball between your knees, one or the other, and let the knees go side to side, and make sure that your hips feel like they're supported on the bolster. If you feel like you're falling off of it, or you're going on the other side, dropping off, then you might need to scoot it a little forward under your tailbone. So the knees go side to side, the feet get pretty cozy here. They start to close in. Now, when they rock back into the center, you're going to bring your knees into your chest and push the bolster away. So it's forward. Your feet are pressed onto it with the block still between the knees. And then bring your arms to the ceiling. So the hands lift up. They've got no destination at the moment. Turn your palms back. Just try to maintain this for a few moments. Palms back. Now, if you like to do bridge pose without a blanket under your head, you probably want to slide that back now and decide, well, does that feel better? Do I want my blanket? Use it if you want it. Turn your palms back again, right over the shoulder line, and then push into your heels and start to lift your hips. Be sure when you come into bridge and your arms go overhead now, palms to the floor, that your feet feel like they're underneath the knees when you lift your hips up. Okay, so palms are turned around and back and down, right? So it's a different wrist position. Okay, now keep the hips in that lifted position. Keep them lofty. Keep them up. Squeeze the block or the ball. This is the benefit to having the ball here, is that you work the pelvic floor a different way. But the block is good. Okay, so use that opportunity to squeeze in. And now as you lower down, I want you to lower about halfway. Keep the arms overhead if you can. If not, you take them back down. That's okay. Lower the spine and traction the spinal column vertebrae by vertebrae. Once the tailbone lands, you're going to keep the feet on the bolster. And as you lift again, I want you to work on pushing down to your feet. This is the last time with the bolster under the feet. Okay, and notice the measurement of space in the front of the thigh lids that stretches. Okay, the glutes get a lot of work. Okay, now this time when you lower down, you're going to lower your arms forward and down. And I want you to push your bolster to the right side of your mat, kick it over. You can do that with a block between the knees. And then put your feet on the floor and try coming up in a bridge with your hands down besides your hips. So when you lift up your hips this time, you're going to push down to the floor. And the spacing in the thighs is different. It's not better or worse. Some people might prefer it, some not. It's a shorter distance in the thigh because your feet are not as high up. You don't get as much hip flexor stretch. But there are some other benefits to this. So feel the shoulders back and keep the palms so they're facing down. It's tempting to do all those bridge techniques that you've learned, but keep it simple and lift the heels up. And then as you lift up, if you lose your block almost, notice the thigh muscles basically can't contract very easily. And then as you lower your heels down, press the heels down. Good. Lift the hips, try. And then as you bring your arms together at the hands, interlace your fingers when you thought you could do no more with your glute muscles. You're going to try to keep your hips lifting just this high, as high as they'll go. Okay? So now as you hold on to the hands hold together, can you interlace your fingers at the root so you have like this 10-fingered fist that you feel? Okay. Now, when you turn your palms open on the floor besides your hips, you're going to lower your spine down. Now that your glutes are very ready and fired up to go, you're going to let your spine lengthen. Tuck the tailbone away under, tail down, and then bring your knees to your chest and remove the block and cross the left leg to the bolster, okay? If you happen to have a ball and you want to put that at your sacrum, this would be a good time to add the ball, and or a block would work too, pointy edge. And then if you have that sandbag, place that on the exterior left leg. But feel where your body has turned. From the beginning of class, we moved a lot with the ribs. And now we're moving kind of the lower rib. First, it was kind of mid to upper, and now it's mid to lower and into the hip. So really set that sandbag so that it's in an appropriate space for you to feel like there's weight. And that dimension of circulation is lengthening the side of that leg. And your right leg can bend, right? You might bend it quite a bit. You might enjoy the leg to be almost straight on the right leg. You can kind of provide yourself with some searching out here for a moment. And that left arm is open and you let your head roll to the left. Yeah, the right arm could go across the chest. And you can hold it with your left hand to the right elbow and stretch your shoulder. If that's too much, let your arms simply relax. So the eyes relax and the breath fills up at the lower belly. Give it a few moments here. Center the spine and feel where you cross-section the movement of the leg in benefit for the circulation into your hip. Yeah, it's nice to have extremities. Now, when you do come out of this shape, you have an option to be in a reclining pigeon pose for a few moments, which it could be knees into chest or crossing that left foot to the right knee when you switch the bolster. So there's many things you could do to use as a weaving shape to the next side, but you might work with feeling the bolster under your left leg and kind of slide your left knee up. So you're trying to really get as much range of motion into the left glute. And then when you roll on your back, you bring your right foot in and you slide that foot towards your seat and you just hook your left foot onto the right knee. Usually works pretty good. And you could stay here with it, right? You don't have to change and move your hands under your right knee and squeeze. That's one option though. But when you're here with this knee open, kind of feel the relationship of the joints and the back on the right side. If it's kind of lifted up, you're trying to seal that space down. So pushing into the right foot could be really helpful here to center. So I like it to stay with it sometimes, anchored down to the floor with my right foot versus kick it up. So you could try that for the next few seconds before we switch, either holding under the right leg, squeeze, or keep the right foot on the floor and get your tailbone to center. And then switch sides, bolster on the left now, move it over, left leg stretches down. You can hug the right leg into your chest just to prep the back of the waist. And then cross the right leg to the bolster, okay? So when you're crossing at the kind of the hip shifter, right? Notice how you shift from your low back into the pelvis. And then if you use the ball, right, you're going to place that to the sacrum. So that'll be equal on both sides. It's not going to be different. It's going to be simply sacrum, pure and simple. And then as we add maybe sand to the exterior, you're going to use that sand sack on the thigh and then let the arm blend open and let your head roll to the right. Whatever props might be there for you could be useful. It could be blanket, right? And that left arm could cross the chest. You can hold the elbow with the right hand, centering through the shoulder blades. Now feel all the way up through your back into the skull. Wherever you let your arms end up here, feel where the balance is in the upper chest, into the shoulders, and going inwards. Now that second side, you might feel a little different in how your hip kicks into gear. Might be a little smoother, warmed up for the position. So you might challenge yourself by bending the left knee a little bit further so that you'll feel a little bit more of a crossover into the back muscles as well. So the back of the core and then that twist in the core band. Okay, so feel that diaphragmatic awareness, like you're getting a twist in the lower core. Now let's fine tune this in the final few moments here. We're going to move our ball away and the sand. Now, I like that version of keeping the right leg kind of sliding up the bolster. So it kind of moves across the side of my hip and into my glute. It's all pretty sensitive areas, right, that you're circulating through into your hip and this lateral rotator. Now, when you slide that right foot up, you've got as high as you can go. Then you've got to get your arms span wide and then roll into your back so your right foot is on the left knee and your left foot centered on the ground, and you shift your hips back to the basic position knee is open. And you certainly could hold under the left thigh, or the knee, you could too, depending on your knee health or the vibration around your knees, and squeeze in. I like to keep it simple with the back of the waistline feeling centered here. Okay, we'll get a final sweep here through the texture of our back, since it's been kind of in different chunks of movement during the practice, right? We've kind of like separated a lot of things, dissected them. So take a few more moments when you start to align your legs back into the center, uncrossing the ankles, hold onto the backs, and then carefully either roll to the side and push yourself up, or roll up to central seated channel. And then let's take a moment to get some blocks up in the front of your mat, so they're at the mid height. And when you put your bolster on the top, put a blanket on that bolster, if you've got an extra blanket, right? If you've got an extra towel, and separate the feet right on the sides of the blocks, and let your back have a moment here where you just lean into the position of the spine lengthening. Okay, we'll take a short Shavasana. So as we come up with our legs on the bolster blanket bench, we push our hands on the ground to move our hips towards it, okay? So the heels are floating. So when I have a heel float, I lower down my elbows and I put a sandbag across my rib connector. Yeah, right into that space below the sternum. If you decide you would like to have more weight on your center line of your body, you can add some weight. Some people like to have sand across the shins, and some might like to have even that squishy ball under the sacrum, right? You can kind of play with the different layers. And then have your arms feel some motion so they separate and they have a layer of openness for the chest, for the back layer of the waist, and the shoulders centering. Feel where your eyes rest back and the weight of your body gradually releasing and surrendering. Heels floating, scanning the body for the circulation that we've kind of taken itself through different winding channels through the practice, circulation and balance, inner balance. If you can keep your heels at that floating state versus rotation, inhale for a count of 4 to 5. Belly lifts. And as you exhale for a count of 5 to 6, belly relaxes towards the spine. Feel a deep movement in the lower abdomen with the sensation of the movement of the breath. Strengthening in the diaphragm and the lungs. So a full breath focuses on lower all the way to the upper ranges of the lungs. Now committing to feeling the legs on the bolster, circle the feet and feel that rotation even in your toes. You might feel that the ball of the foot on each side is kind of in charge of the movement of the toes dialing open. But as you feel that movement, can you adjust to feel as much of your foot as it turns. And then turn the toes to move inwards. If they get a little cramped up, you might have to shake it out and get a finding of releasing your feet, just letting them be. Remove the sand. And if you bring your arms to stretch, interlacing the fingers, hands up and overhead, we bring the legs back into feeling the bolster blanket bench. You could bring your feet together, your knees out. This is a nice version of cobbler's pose because the gravitational pull into the legs is different than we often do. Sometimes a little more intense in the adductors. And then as you bring your knees back into proportions that you could reach to, you'll hug them in and roll to the side. And let your hands help be the support that guides you up. So taking a blanket or any height that you want to sit on, a pillow, a cushion, and let's bring our hands to rest into our lap. So we have a moment of centering together, feeling that collective consciousness of us all in practice. So whether you're in screen or you're off, that's fine. Feel where your spine is up from your pelvis, and then lift up the shoulders and roll them back. Lift up the hands, bowing down into